It started with a video, strange, chaotic, and completely out of character. Meghan Markle, dressed in black and flaunting a conspicuous baby bump, danced in a hospital room with Prince Harry by her side. The music blared lyrics about being a baby mama, and the internet didn't know what to make of it. Was it satire, a publicity stunt, or something far more calculated? In one unsettling clip, Meghan reignited a firestorm that the royal family thought had long been extinguished. Was she ever really pregnant? When the footage of Meghan Markle dancing in a hospital room first hit the internet, the collective reaction was disbelief. Here was a woman who had spent years styling herself as a poised duchess, now captured in a scene that felt like an outtake from a reality show. She twerked, laughed, and posed with exaggerated gestures, seemingly oblivious to the seriousness such a setting normally commands. But once the initial shock wore off, an old and much more serious question resurfaced. Was Meghan Markle ever really pregnant? This wasn't a new theory. Ever since the announcement of her pregnancy with Archie back in 2018, there had been whispers. Online forums questioned the shape of her bump, its sudden size changes, even moments when it appeared to fold strangely as she sat. These theories were always brushed aside by the mainstream media as cruel conspiracy fodder. But this video changed that. It gave a visual anchor to years of speculation. Suddenly, it wasn't just online sleuths revisiting the mystery, it was figures with serious influence. Piers, long a vocal critic of Meghan and Harry, didn't hold back. He labeled the video disgraceful and suggested it confirmed suspicions he'd quietly harbored for years. Jeremy Kyle, another outspoken media personality, described the performance as cringeworthy and unbefitting of someone tied to the British monarchy. For years, these two had been dismissed as over-the-top critics, but now their voices echoed what many were afraid to say aloud. The media, once fearful of backlash, now tentatively joined the chorus. And the question grew louder: was the pregnancy real? Because if it wasn't, it wouldn't just be a scandal, it would be a deception on a constitutional level. And that made everything feel far more urgent. The line of succession is at stake. While much of the media frenzy focused on the strange aesthetics of the video, Meghan's dancing, the moon bump, the dramatic lighting, others began to ask a deeper, far more unsettling question. If the pregnancy wasn't real, what does that mean for Archie and Lilibet's place in the royal family? In the United Kingdom, the rules of succession aren't just ceremonial, they are constitutional. According to long-standing royal precedent, a child must be born of the body of a royal to qualify for a legitimate place in the line of succession. That phrase might sound old-fashioned, but its implications are very real. Surrogacy, while not unheard of in modern times, complicates that rule. And if it was used without disclosure, that could unravel everything. This isn't a matter of media etiquette or public relations. It cuts straight to the legitimacy of royal bloodlines. If Meghan Markle used a surrogate for either of her children and never made that fact public, the implications are massive. It would mean that the royal institution, knowingly or unknowingly, allowed two children to enter the line of succession under false pretenses. And in a monarchy that prides itself on heritage, tradition, and strict lineage, that kind of oversight is no small matter. The question of was she ever pregnant suddenly transformed into, are her children actually eligible for royal titles? It's not a tabloid headline anymore, it's a constitutional risk. And this is exactly why that video sparked something beyond gossip. It lit a legal and political fuse. Social media took the lead, but even legal scholars began to weigh in, referencing the very laws and customs that uphold the monarchy. This wasn't about drama, it was about duty, protocol, and whether a breach had already taken place years ago, hidden beneath a carefully staged public image. And if Meghan's pregnancies weren't as they seemed, the scandal could shift from personal shame to royal betrayal. The bump that just didn't move right. The hospital video didn't just raise eyebrows, it raised questions that could no longer be ignored. One of the most immediate reactions came from viewers who couldn't look away from the baby bump. Something about it felt wrong. It didn't sit the way a full-term pregnancy should. It shifted oddly, bouncing during movements where most pregnant women would be immobile. Meghan squatted, bent down, and even twerked, activities that most women near their due date would avoid entirely. But more than the choreography, it was the physics of the bump itself that had people talking. It was too smooth, too round, and somehow too detached from her actual body. What started as a visual oddity soon gained traction in professional circles. Nurses, midwives, and even obstetricians chimed in online, many of them anonymously, pointing out inconsistencies. One noted the bump floated instead of being anchored by gravity. Another highlighted how it lacked the natural motion that accompanies real abdominal weight. Some referenced past footage from as far back as 2019, where Meghan was seen sitting down and the bump appeared to fold unnaturally, or where it shifted shape as her hand pressed lightly against it. Suddenly, these weren't internet sleuths throwing around wild theories. They were medical professionals raising legitimate concerns. Even Meghan's usually vocal defenders had little to say. The silence from her camp, both official and informal, became deafening. That silence created space for scrutiny, and into that space rushed a wave of skepticism. What had once been dismissed as mean-spirited gossip now looked like a plausible deception. Frame-by-frame analysis began spreading across platforms, with comparisons to prosthetic bellies sold online. Some viewers pointed out that the bump bore an uncanny resemblance to retail products from costume websites. What should have been a heartwarming moment now felt more like a scripted scene, one that didn't quite pass the sniff test. And if the visuals couldn't be trusted, what else might have been staged? From craving privacy to viral baby mama dancing. Meghan Markle once said all she wanted was peace, privacy, a life away from the flashing cameras and relentless media spin. That was the justification we all heard back in early 2020 when she and Prince Harry stepped back from royal duties and moved to North America. The message was clear. They were done with the public eye. They craved normalcy, stability, and control over their own narrative. But then came the now infamous hospital dance video, where Meghan appears in a dimly lit room, dressed in black, gyrating to music about being a baby mama and collecting child support. It was loud, it was flashy, and it was public by design. Suddenly, everything about that privacy narrative unraveled. This wasn't a leaked video, this was deliberate, produced, curated, the lighting was dramatic, the camera angles suggest planning, and the music choice was far from subtle. Meghan, once portrayed as a composed duchess navigating the stiff upper lip of royal life, now seemed to be performing in what looked more like a TikTok skit than a maternity moment. It left people confused. And then it left them angry, because if privacy was what she really wanted, why post this? Why push a video that feels like a parody of motherhood, right down to the fake-looking bump and exaggerated moves? Critics, who had been previously labeled as cruel or jealous, now felt vindicated. Piers Morgan wasn't just mocking the visuals, he was pointing out the blatant contradiction. Jeremy Kyle nearly gagged live on air as he described what he saw, comparing it to a lap dancing club. This wasn't royal, this wasn't dignified, and for many viewers it felt like they were being played. That the woman who once asked for compassion was now flaunting controversy for attention. The shift from regal to ridiculous happened fast, and the public noticed. It wasn't just bizarre, it was a betrayal of the very image Meghan had spent years crafting. And it cracked something in the public's trust. Meme war and media frenzy erupt. As the video continued to circulate, it became more than just a viral clip, it became cultural ammunition. Social media platforms lit up like a battlefield, with memes flying from every direction. One moment, Meghan was being edited into scenes from Jersey Shore, the next she was a meme captioned, "From royalty to reality TV." It didn't matter what your opinion of her was, everyone had something to say. The internet thrives on absurdity, and this clip handed it a feast. But amid the humor, something more intense was happening. The tone wasn't just mocking, it was incredulous. People weren't just laughing, they were angry, confused, and deeply skeptical. And suddenly, the media couldn't look away either. Mainstream journalists who had tiptoed around the pregnancy rumors for years now found themselves dragged into the conversation. The usual rule of silence, ignore the speculation, protect the institution, collapsed under the weight of online pressure. News outlets quietly began contacting sources, investigating timelines, and double-checking hospital references. Something had shifted. This wasn't just some rogue Reddit thread anymore. It was everywhere. Even those who once defended Meghan found themselves stumbling for words. The silence from her publicists, her allies, and the Sussex PR machine only added to the chaos. And then came the headline that summed up the mood. Piers Morgan tweeting, "We're about 2 months away from the sex tape." It was brutal, sure, but it also captured how far public opinion had swung. The respectability Meghan once clung to now seemed shattered. Jeremy Kyle echoed the sentiment in his own style, comparing the hospital room to a lap dancing club for pregnant women, and labeling the video a disgrace. There was no subtlety anymore, the gloves were off, and as the noise reached fever pitch, a new question emerged, not about Meghan's behavior, but about what the palace was going to do next. Because if this kept growing, ignoring it would no longer be an option. The media finally breaks the silence. For years, the mainstream media avoided certain topics like landmines, none more so than the rumors surrounding Meghan Markle's pregnancies. Editors feared backlash, writers avoided anything that could be labeled as conspiracy or cruelty, but after the hospital dance video exploded across the internet, that long-standing silence finally cracked. Journalists, even at legacy outlets, began sending quiet messages to their sources. Whispers turned into questions. Was this footage new? Was it real? And if not, why had it been released now? Suddenly, people in high places were no longer laughing, and they weren't dismissing the theories anymore either. Behind the scenes, newsroom Slack channels and WhatsApp groups lit up with activity. Reporters wanted to know where the footage came from, whether the setting matched a real labor and delivery room, and whether Meghan had ever been formally confirmed as giving birth in a hospital at all. The timing was suspect. The production quality was odd. And most damning of all, the silence from Meghan's camp, usually so quick to issue statements and corrections, remained unbroken. Not even a vague Instagram quote about rising above the noise was posted. Just nothing. That silence was louder than any denial. For years, palace insiders and royal reporters had protected Harry and Meghan with a delicate, almost fearful restraint. But now the air had shifted. Even anchors who once defended the couple began hedging their support. One famously said, "If this video was meant to prove something, it has only raised more doubt." Another noted, "The problem isn't that Meghan danced, it's that she looked like she was playing a character and the stakes of that character are very real." The story had jumped from gossip sites to the front pages. And when that happens in Britain, or anywhere the monarchy still holds symbolic power, there's no going back. The media was no longer shielding her. They were investigating her. And the world was watching for answers. The hospital room that wasn't real. As the clip spread across platforms, a new layer of analysis emerged, this time from people with medical expertise. Nurses, midwives, and even doctors began scrutinizing the background of the video, and what they saw raised even more red flags. "That's not a real labor and delivery room," one nurse wrote bluntly. Others chimed in, pointing out how the IV stand was incorrectly placed, how the bed didn't match hospital specifications, how no visible medical equipment matched standard maternity protocols. What should have been an intimate, vulnerable moment now looked like a set, a performance, and not a convincing one. Soon comparisons were being made between real hospital footage and Meghan's video. People who had given birth noticed what was missing. Where were the monitors, the staff, the medical necessities? The lighting looked theatrical, the surroundings too polished. What should have felt real instead felt rehearsed. That's when someone dubbed it a costume drama, and the phrase stuck. It didn't help that Meghan was seen dancing with an oddly stiff bump that didn't move naturally. Her outfit didn't resemble typical hospital gowns, and the way she moved, bending, squatting, spinning, looked less like labor and more like choreography. The internet wasn't just guessing anymore, it was documenting. Users uploaded side-by-side breakdowns of Meghan's video next to footage from hospital birth rooms. Every detail was dissected: the shoes she wore, the floor tiles, the absence of vital signs monitors. And then came the old footage. Recycled clips resurfaced. Moments where Meghan's bump folded strangely as she sat, or where her hand pressed against her stomach and the shape shifted unnaturally. These weren't new conspiracy theories. They were old suspicions brought back with force, now reinforced by new evidence. And as all this mounted, the question deepened, not just about the bump, but about the entire scene. Was this ever meant to be believed as real, or was it designed to distract? Because if this was just a carefully staged illusion, the implications reached far beyond style or taste. They touched on this might be a staged pregnancy after all. By the time viewers started posting side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's pregnancy footage, the mood online had shifted from ridicule to investigation. One viral post showed Meghan dancing in the hospital room next to an older clip of her on stage during her first pregnancy. The differences were staggering: the posture, the shape of the bump. Even her center of gravity seemed off. It wasn't just eagle-eye fans fueling the conversation anymore, it was experts. Norman Fenton, a respected mathematics professor, added his voice to the chaos. He didn't lean on emotions or gossip. Instead, he looked at physical logic. "This bump doesn't behave like a real pregnancy," he said, noting how its consistency and movement broke basic rules of biology. This wasn't medical speculation, it was mathematics applied to anatomy. He didn't need to diagnose anything to make his point. The video, as presented, didn't align with known realities of full-term pregnancy. And when cold, logical reasoning enters the conversation, people start listening differently. It felt like a turning point. Theories that had once been dismissed as fringe suddenly had structure. And that structure pointed toward something chilling: the possibility that not only was the video staged, but so was the pregnancy itself. Now the implications grew heavier. If this had all been a performance, from the bump to the hospital room to the very idea of birth, then what else had been manufactured? Was the public shown a carefully designed fantasy, crafted for attention, control, or sympathy? And if so, did it go all the way back to Archie's birth in 2019? The silence from Meghan's camp spoke volumes. There was no denial, no clarification, just a vacuum that allowed these questions to grow sharper by the hour. What started as a strange viral clip had now evolved into a legitimate inquiry. People weren't just questioning Meghan's choices. They were questioning the integrity of the entire story. And if the pregnancy was fake, what did that mean for the children, for the monarchy, for everything the royal institution is supposed to uphold? Calls for royal action go public. As the storm surrounding the video intensified, the public's tone shifted from disbelief to action. This wasn't just about optics anymore. It had become a question of accountability. Online petitions began to gain traction. One called for Buckingham Palace to conduct a full inquiry into the circumstances of Meghan's pregnancies. Another demanded that the children's titles be suspended until medical documentation could be reviewed. Comment sections, once filled with jokes and memes, were now populated by legal arguments and references to royal succession protocols. The energy was no longer chaotic, it was organized, focused, and determined. Then came the most explosive rumor yet, that Prince Harry was considering reverting to his mother's maiden name, Spencer. It was unconfirmed, of course, but it spread like wildfire. To many, this wasn't just a personal gesture, it was symbolic, a distancing, a signal that even Harry was quietly stepping away from the royal framework that had turned so toxic. Insiders reported that King Charles was deeply disappointed, while Prince William was allegedly furious, not just at the content of the video, but at the timing. Just as he was working to modernize and stabilize the monarchy, the Sussexes had yanked the institution back into chaos. Royal gossip columns speculated that William referred to the video privately as a disgrace to everything Mum stood for. That line, whether true or not, struck a chord. It brought the conversation back to Princess Diana, to legacy, to dignity. Royal biographers, who had spent years crafting careful narratives about the Sussexes, began rewriting chapters. Updates were made in real time. Theories once whispered now filled pages. Even senior palace staffers, long silent, started speaking off the record. One reportedly said, "We've protected them for too long. This isn't about media bias anymore. It's about national trust." The temperature had changed. This wasn't just a public backlash, it was a royal reckoning. And for the first time, the pressure wasn't just coming from tabloids or Twitter threads, it was coming from within the walls of the monarchy itself. Where silence says everything. Through all the chaos, through all the memes, theories, investigations, and media pivots, one thing remained constant. Meghan Markle said absolutely nothing. Not a denial, not a clarification, not even the usual indirect Instagram post with a cryptic quote about protecting your peace. Just complete, strategic silence. And in that silence, the speculation grew louder. At first, people thought she might be taking the high road. But as the story refused to die, that silence began to look less like dignity and more like defiance, or worse, avoidance. Because if there was nothing to hide, why not say something? Even her defenders began to retreat. Anchors who had once gone to great lengths to shield her image now cautiously questioned the narrative. One noted, "The problem isn't that Meghan danced, it's that it looks like she's playing a character, and the stakes of that character are very real." That line hit harder than any tabloid headline. Because it wasn't just about bump shape or hospital room aesthetics anymore. It was about trust, public trust, institutional trust, and whether the royal family was being used as a backdrop for something performative and entirely inauthentic. As the noise faded into discomfort, a new tone took its place, one of unease. The public wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting, and wondering what else had been carefully managed, curated, and perhaps fabricated. And while Buckingham Palace continued its centuries-old strategy of saying nothing, the public wasn't so easily pacified this time. The unanswered questions lingered like fog. Was the video a distraction, a marketing ploy, or an accidental glimpse behind the curtain of a much bigger illusion? For many, this wasn't just another scandal. It was the moment the royal narrative broke. A performance dressed as authenticity, a silence louder than words, and a video that may well become the point in royal history where the line between fiction and monarchy blurred. For good, because once belief is shattered, even silence can't rebuild it. Not without truth, and not without consequences.